is a pleasure and also an honor to come and share with you what we know so far about immunization. We have been, our team at HealthNet Consult has been honored to actually do quite a bit of work on immunization over the last 5 or 6 years. And I've interacted with most of the people who are presenting here in one form or another on the different studies. I'm quite excited to see some of the results of our efforts already presented. I was very happy particularly to see Mr. Loze's presentation. It had some of the things you're going to see in mine. Many times people think that consultants are just only concerned about do the work, get paid and run away. But we carry the place of wanting to see that the findings are actually used to guide and inform policy. So thank you very much, the organizers, for giving me this opportunity. Like Professor Peter Weiso mentioned, I am not wearing a hat, but standing today I have several hats, which I will not mention. So I don't know which hat I'm coming with today. I guess I'm probably wearing all of them, but I'm not going to that. Really the background is what you already know, and I don't think I should spend a lot of time. But we know that as economists on our side, we always have needs which are greater than the resources that we have. And when we have to allocate those resources, we look for the best way possible to do it. And cost effectiveness, as some of you might know, is one of the ways of trying to establish whether money should go into something. So you have seen already that we have too many vaccines, which are all nice. They're going to give us some good outcomes. But the question is, can we actually really afford those vaccines as a country? And the presentation I'm going to share with you is really around that, whether we can sustain these activities. Again, we always look into the context. Before we talk about sustainability, we know that immunization is listed in the health sector, and we can't really talk about sustaining immunization without really looking at the entire sector. We might know already that the health sector has been quite miserably performing in terms of financing, and we have seen over the last 5 years or more, actually 10 to be precise, that the health sector, if we just observe the allocations that have gone to the health sector, one can actually draw a conclusion that it's not been that much prioritized compared to other sectors. And we draw that conclusion from the fact that increasingly over the years, the percentage of government budget that has been allocated to the health sector has actually been reducing. We know that the health sector is affected by population numbers, and we know that our population has been increasing tremendously. So if you get a combination of increasing population and reducing allocation to the sector, it means that in real terms, the sector actually is very poorly funded. I think that's not new at all for you. The slide there shows a couple of figures. I didn't have enough time to actually update to, for instance, the 2017-18. But that is a picture that hasn't changed much in the last 2 or so years. So clearly the health sector is poorly funded. And Dr. Loze had already mentioned that immunization is also inadequately funded. And that also doesn't come as a surprise. In order to talk about funding for immunization, we need to take into consideration what has already been mentioned around the Immunization Act, the public financial management reforms, around how money goes to the districts, and then of course the health financing reforms in general which affect the sector, things like insurance, as well as resource-based financing. So we really can't talk about sustainability of immunization without understanding what else is going on in the sector that is likely to affect that. So that being the background, really, let's talk about immunization expenditure and financing. I'm just going to flip a couple of statements. We've done several studies, as I mentioned. We've done costings, we've done resource trackings, we've supported government in developing the HSS grant to Gavi. We have been really involved in immunization from all angles, which is a good thing, because you come to a place of saturation of understanding, and we are happy to always share these experiences. So from a resource tracking which we did, we found that over over the years, there has been an increase in immunization funding, which is a good thing if you compare between 2011-12 and about 2015-16. But when you pay close attention to that increase, you actually notice that it started off from the point when Gavi started funding. Some of you might be old enough to remember that at some point the Gavi funding was stopped, I think around about 2005-06. And as a result, immunization was only dependent on government funding for several years. So when you look at 2011-12, you find that there was about 70 billion shillings going into immunization. And then as soon as the Gavi ban is lifted, we see a huge increase suddenly to the 295 billion shillings, which is by just one donor. So it is a good thing, but I think it's a questionable thing, like my colleague Gilbert was mentioning. What if Gavi is not available tomorrow? What does that mean? Expenditure, we have found that Gavi remained the main source of financing, and it's more than 63% of our expenditure is driven by Gavi, it's about 63%. So it's important to note that while donors have been a major contributor, the pattern of their contribution can be unpredictable. I think I'm glad to hear that there was a study on marking down the partners, and I think they've increased from the ones that we knew. But one of the things that we have come to learn, not only for immunization, but in general for the health sector, probably even for other sectors, is that donor behavior can sometimes be driven by so many other things behind our own country context and needs. And we have found them to be highly unreliable and unpredictable, not because they are bad people, but because they are also driven by their own government's arrangements. So you might have already noticed when there's a change in government, it affects what they fund and what they don't fund. And usually for planning purposes, you can't sit down donors and tell them, help us to predict what you're likely to give us in the next 3 years so we can plan for it. Most of them can't tell you beyond the year in which they're functioning. And that affects the way you plan, it affects the way you allocate resources, because you actually don't know what the future holds. And that is a real challenge for finance. So some of the work that we've done is to actually ask ourselves questions around research future requirements. We have all these things coming in, as they've mentioned. You've seen that over the years. We've had several vaccines introduced, and there's more in the pipeline. And the question is, what are the real requirements for immunization in the future? And when we look at that, we did a couple of scenarios because some of the things that we think or anticipate will happen, we don't know whether they'll happen for real. So the first scenario is to actually remain with the status quo, and that was done, I think, about a year ago. The status quo was to remain with the vaccines which were happening, including the ones which had been implemented. And in there you see the cost of the vaccine, the recurrent cost of getting it pushed out of the facilities and providing the service. A couple of capital costs like cold chain improvement and so on, and the total. When you consider the status quo and you begin to add on a couple of vaccines, we did think it was wise to say that all vaccines would be introduced at the same time. So in the analysis that we did, we considered a progressive introduction of vaccines, and it's not by surprise that you see that Rota is the first one, which we now hear is going to be introduced hopefully next year. So Rota and MR, you will get to that those sorts of numbers. And then if in scenario 3 you took the status quo and you did Rota and yellow fever, you would get to pretty similar numbers. So those are sort of the picture of if we go in that direction, what shall we need for the sector? That's in US dollars, so it is quite significant. We say this because when, for instance, in the earlier slide, when you hear that Gavi is going to give us $40 million, it's a very broad, it's something that we can celebrate and be excited about. But when you realize that your actual need is about $800 million, you actually realize that $40 million is a drop in the ocean. So I think it's important that these kind of figures come out so we can understand how to interpret them. When you take the CMOIP estimates, you know that we all have the CMOIP, which also projects into the future to look at what is needed. We find that it's slightly underestimated because usually they do it 5 years in the past, sorry, looking backward, and might not have everything that we have included in our scenarios. When we look at scenario 5, which is the incremental needs and we exclude new vaccine introduction, you see that the needs for immunization dropped to about 540 million. So you realize that when we look at estimates for what we need in the different scenarios with introduction of vaccines, for instance, we are about $800 million US, but when we completely put away introduction of vaccines, we drop down to about 540. This is the estimation of need for immunization in the country. Clearly, you can see the impact of introducing these vaccines. You have about an extra $260 million as a result of that, if you just introduce 2 vaccines. So that being the need, what are the resources? What resources do we have at hand? The available resources, we also looked at a couple of scenarios, both in terms of what is really available today, but also what could be available in future. So we looked at scenarios, and that's what I'm just going to share with you here. We have, I think, 3 scenarios in this. Okay, we have what is called the secured scenario. The secured is based on what the CMOIP listed as the different sources of funds available, compared with what the donors and the different partners were already putting in, plus what government is allocating. And over a period of the next 5 years, we found that we might be able, if donors behave the way they're behaving now, and they don't cut funding, and they don't shift their money to other places, secured would be about 587 million US dollars. That's for 5 years. If you remember the figures that I showed you of need, that is insufficient. It just covers probably the status quo. The probable, which earlier on, the probable scenario, we made an assumption that stakeholders would provide similar amounts and they would not, where they would not provide future estimates. So that was another 5 years. Sorry, I think the secured is resources of EPR stakeholders as assured by commitments. So the probable is if donors continue to behave the way they are behaving over the next 5 years, I would have about 662. And then the government optimistic one is a scenario where we made an assumption that government of Uganda would double or increase by 50% based on their trajectory of graduation of government of Uganda to expect to actually finance 100%. So those are the resources that would potentially be available in those different scenarios. And when you look at the financial gap, sorry, that might be a little bit squeezed, but the financial gap over the years in the different scenarios ranges between 62,000 US dollars, with some, 62 million US dollars to 110 million US dollars. That is the range, really, between the different scenarios. And that is not small money, I'm sure we know that. Now, I think really, okay, further, I think the important thing here to note, the exclusion of government funds from the available resources shows that there is a 90% financing gap. Okay? So if we look at the scenarios and the different things we could do, both introduction of vaccines or even not introducing them, when we remove Gavi as a funder, we actually get a 90% financial gap, meaning we'll only be able to finance 10% of our need. So that represents about close to 500 million US dollars over the 5 years that we mentioned. If you recall, the estimated need for The status quo was about 540 million US dollars. And if we remove 487 million US dollars from Gavi, that shows you how much we'll be able to fund between government and a few other partners who are not Gavi. So it would be quite dismal. It's important to just emphasize, which you already have noted now, that without donor support, the country is unable to sustainably finance the immunization program, especially in the light of new vaccines being added to the immunization schedule. So that is a very important message to remember. Again, in the interest of time, this is information which this presentation is available. We are not able to actually finance this. On average, the planned new vaccines take up about 42% of total secured funding. On average, MEPI will have to spend 27% of its total secured immunization on new vaccine introduction. If the vaccine introduction behaves the same way PCV was introduced. If it changes and there's requirement for either a special way of delivery or capacity for cold chain to change and so on, probably the cost will go higher. So new and underutilized vaccines constitute more than half of the total vaccine cost, and these vaccine costs need to be taken seriously into consideration before we make the decision to actually introduce new vaccines. Probably I'm not going to dwell much on this because already it appeared in Dr. Muze's presentation, and I'm glad when I said earlier that I was happy to see some of these things appearing in the Ministry of Health documents and presentations. It means they are taking these studies seriously. So we can really, obviously it's important. We've come from context of how much is the health sector funded or underfunded, and therefore how much is immunization funded or underfunded, to the places of what is need and what is available. And now the question is, what can we do to sustain? Several things can be done for sustainability. Whether or not they will lead to sustainability is questionable, depending on how much money they will be able to raise. So we considered in some of the analysis that we did, we considered a couple of things around mobilization of additional resources, trying to make donor support a bit more reliable and stable, and then also trying to get the program to be a bit more efficient in the way they were using the resources. So those being the options we had for looking into sustainability, we considered what are some of these things. Operationalizing, for instance, the Immunization Act is something which has already been mentioned. It can be considered as a medium-term option, and so on. The mobilizing the additional external resources, leveraging private sector resources. I was happy to actually see these things in this presentation. So they're already there, and I'm not going to repeat them. And the reports that are informed by this presentation are actually available with more detail. So when we did a bit of sort of the back of the envelope calculation of what some of these options can get for us, we find that if we looked at the immunization fund, if we looked at the investment income based on how much money can be raised and capitalized in the fund, we found that we can raise up to about $2.3 billion US dollars. There was discussions around earmarking a percentage of taxes to immunization, about 2% levy on spirits, soft drinks, and so on. And again, our back of the envelope calculations show that we could raise about $2 million US dollars. And the last option was to look into health insurance. It was implemented. What percentage can also be earmarked as a proportion? And we found that we would get about $1.16 million, bring up to about 5.5. I think it's important to just quickly mention that these are not very easy to implement options. So even if the numbers show here that we can raise about $5 million US from these options, having them implemented is quite challenging in itself. For instance, a levy that is dedicated to immunization is not something the Ministry of Finance would be willing to take lightly for obvious reasons. And almost everyone, I don't know whether fortunate or unfortunate privilege to do similar analysis for other conditions. So we not only do work around immunization, we do this kind of work for malaria, we do this for HIV. So when HIV is lamenting about inadequate funding and they also want to seek for additional resources, these are the same things. We tell them, get more income from government, get more donors to support you and become efficient. And when we do this, when we want government to give them more money where we go, we tell them, if you can negotiate an earmark tax. So imagine if Ministry of Health went to Ministry of Finance and they said, we want an earmark tax for HIV, and an earmark tax for immunization, and an earmark tax for TB and malaria, and NCDs and everything else that is poorly funded. I don't think the Ministry of Health is very keen to actually go into this place, not even for the sector. Not even for the sectors involved to actually get a special tax. So it is that difficult. So these numbers can look a bit deceptive and even they can excite us, but getting to this place is not easy. And I think the people who are working with the immunization fund already know that it's even difficult to imagine how to operationalize it. Yeah, that's a real challenge. Strategic actions for increasing reliability. No matter how nicely we behave with our development partners, many times their hands are also tied. But if there's any way we can improve relations and get them to commit and demonstrate that we are serious, hopefully this can put us in a better place. But it's also not being demonstrated as easygoing. And lastly is program efficiency. This is the place where we have some degree of power. We don't know how much it would bring in, but we can reduce vaccine wastage. Sometimes it is possible, sometimes it's not. Sometimes vaccine wastage is driven by the way vaccines are packaged, and it's just beyond the control of the human resource component. In program procurements, I think we've just had things like stockouts and not having good quantifications and so on. Those are things that can be improved. And then lastly, of course, how service delivery is done can be done slightly better. It might leverage something, but it obviously won't bring in $10 million and above. So again, so I think in concluding, I'll just go back to the question that Elizabeth raised. Should we continue adding vaccines? And I'm not too sure I have the heart to answer that question, heart being that. I'm always caught between the science of understanding outcomes and impact of anything, whether it's vaccines or HIV interventions. We really have the evidence that shows that these things actually do help. We all know already as health economists that vaccines or immunization for that matter is one of the all the interventions of immunization are some of the most cost-effective interventions in the world. So much so that even they stopped funding cost-effectiveness studies for that, for one simple reason. You intervene when someone is young, and you give them an opportunity to live the rest of their lives. So even without going into a technical cost-effectiveness study, vaccines naturally are cost-effective because they save lives. So intuitively, and even without much effort, it makes sense to have these vaccines and to improve life. But we are caught up in the place where someone dangles something nice in front of your eyes, they excite you, they even promise to support you. But then they also tell you that in 5 years' time you will graduate as a country. And you're caught between, yes, a rock and a hard place. Because you understand the impact this thing is going to have, it's good for the country and so on. But even the figures that were being shown by Dr. Lose on what the government has to pay as co-financing, they will tell you that part of the money that has been dangled in front of us by Gavi many times is withheld because government failed to pay for co-financing. So the money looks nice. They will tell you they will give you 400, even if they give us actually $200 million in, which they haven't, but even if it was that much. If they gave it to you in the HSS grant or wherever through vaccines, beautiful thing. But when they give you a condition and say, we will release funds when you co-finance, Now the co-financing looks very small, $2 million US, and government doesn't have it. So government always delays to pay the co-financing, and then government holds back its contribution, and the country is stuck. I don't know whether you understand the argument. So the country is stuck. Even when this money has been approved and seemingly the newspapers, for those of you who like to follow newspapers, Uganda receives $19 million US for vaccines. Sounds fantastic. By the end of the day, that money doesn't trickle down when government is just stuck with about 3 billion shillings to pay so that the 19 can come. And the whole country is, I mean, you've already introduced, you've trained, everyone knows, you've created awareness, there's an expectation, people are demanding, and then you actually can't deliver. So I'm afraid I won't answer that question. I'll sort of leave it to Elizabeth and you guys to debate after I've just left. But it is really a very difficult place. I thank you very much.